This is philosophical metafiction played out as a domestic drama. Better than food, man. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Better Than Food Book Reviews. I'm your host, Cliff Sargent. Hope you're all doing well. Great to see you, as always. Today is a review of a book that was a gift from Anne Mulrooney of Regnery Publishing. It was very, very nice of her. She even sent me a little card. This is Miguel de Unamuno's Abel Sanchez and Other Stories. It's a retelling of the story of Cain and Abel from Genesis in the Bible. Thank you so much for the kind gift, Anne, and thank you for your patience. It was better than food. Miguel de Unamuno was a Spanish Basque author who served as the rectory of the University of Salamanca. He was writing during the time of fascism in Spain, and he was a critic of Miguel de Rivera and later Franco, and he was removed from his position as rector a couple of times. And then eventually he was exiled to the Canary Islands, and then he escaped. So he's had quite a life. His first memory was of a bombing of his neighbor's house, which he almost died in. So Miguel de Unamuno was born into conflict and had to sort of deal with these clashes all of his life, and it certainly informed his philosophical outlook. His son was crippled, then killed by meningitis, which led to him eventually writing his famous philosophical essay, The Tragic Sense of Life. He was an impressive and courageous character, from what I gather, by any metric. You can find some interesting influences in Unamuno, like philosophers like Kierkegaard, but then also Cervantes, the author of Don Quixote. I read that by age 20, he had learned 11 languages so he could read foreign authors in their native tongue, seething with envy on that note. But this book is all about envy, so maybe it's appropriate. He had a big influence. He even influenced Martin Heidegger, I've read in one article. He was concerned primarily with what it means to be human after all of these extreme experiences that he had. He was an existentialist writer before Sartre and Camus. I felt this article by Stefany Anne Golberg summed it up nicely. Consciousness, he learned, was not all it was cracked up to be. Consciousness, which has shown us many interesting truths about existence, has brought even more confusion. The more systems of thought we develop, the more equations we prove, the more contradictions we are handed. The more we learn about life on Earth, the more mysterious the universe becomes. When we back away from this confusion, we become hypocrites, wrote Unamuno. Yet when we confront the chaos, we suffer. Consciousness is our gift and our enemy. Consciousness, wrote Unamuno, is a disease. This thing called consciousness, we learn, is simply awareness of one's own limitations. Starting to sound a little bit like Bataille there. In other words, it is consciousness of death. And this is the tragic sense of life. This book, whoever gets it, contains a couple of other stories, a couple of short stories, as well as Abel Sanchez. But today we're just going to focus on this one. Full title is Abel Sanchez, The History of a Passion. It's a retelling of Cain and Abel in Spain, published in 1917. It is not our ideas which make us optimists or pessimists, he wrote, but our optimism and pessimism derived as much from physiological or perhaps pathological origins, which makes our ideas. This is a story about the origin of a pathological envy. It's a novel of psychological anguish written in the first and third person. You have the narration about the characters, and then you have the protagonist's confessions, like a diary written when he's older. This story chronicles the whole lifetime of Abel and Joaquin. Joaquin is Cain, obviously. It's a religious allegorical drama set in 20th century Spain. The story of Joaquin Monegro's obsessive, passionate envy of his brother Abel Sanchez. It's kind of a Spanish Gothic novel. It has these themes of murder and revenge and madness and religious conflict and cursed bloodlines. It's all in there. A little bit of Edgar Allan Poe, a little bit of Dostoevsky. Good. Joaquin is a doctor. He studies medicine. Abel is a painter. Already we know what happens. We know the story of Cain and Abel. For those of you who need a refresher, it's very short. You can find it at the beginning of the Bible in Genesis. Cain is the firstborn son of Adam and Eve. He's a farmer. Abel is his younger brother, who's a shepherd. God is pleased with Abel's sacrifices, but not with Cain's. Out of jealousy, Cain murders Abel and is then cursed by God. This is the first murder and fratricide. The origin of evil. Suppose you could say like the origin of evil is the snake, who tells Eve to eat the apple. You get the idea. So Joaquin is a doctor, studies very hard, very, very serious, like completely humorless. Abel is a painter, creative, lighthearted, gets very famous much to Joaquin's chagrin. Joaquin is in love with his cousin Helena, who is not interested in him at all. Abel tries to help him by painting her portrait. He sleeps with her and then eventually marries her. On the outside, Joaquin seems to accept it to some degree, but he never actually forgives him. If there was any question before, now it's crystal clear. Joaquin's reason to live, his raison d'etre, basically, is to hate Abel, and eventually to kill him, as we know how the story goes. Joaquin marries a woman he does not love but tolerates just to copy Abel, and she, like a patient martyr, tolerates him and his endless caustic insecurity. When Abel has a child, Joaquin is not happy about it. He's ferociously jealous that he's had one before him, flinging himself into self-hatred, telling himself, "You probably are not even capable. He is more of a man than you," right? Surprisingly, Abel's son actually begins to think of Joaquin as more of a father. Joaquin has a daughter who eventually wants to become a nun, after growing up to realize her father has a deep psychic illness and wants to save him, but is instead persuaded to marry Abel's son, so their bloodlines mix. Joaquin spends his entire life in this spiteful misery, manipulative, callous, and deceitful, hiding his true thoughts and feelings all the time, badly, I'll add. He's just basically an insufferable pity party. He writes his confessions laying out his inner life and motivations, supposedly for his daughter. He's in no way a likable character, but the existential questions he poses are interesting. At the end of it, we just seem to have the same question as him. Why? What is the origin of this cruelty, this malice, this hatred? Where was this tragedy born, and why should it continue? It reminds me of Unamuno's personal creed, which I saw on Wikipedia. It goes like this: "My religion is to seek for truth in life and for life in truth, even knowing that I shall not find them while I live." There's an exhaustion in Joaquin by the end of the book, when he finally murders Abel. This tired acceptance of his doomed fate. In the end, he tells the truth to his family, but he hurts them deeply while doing so, and he always has, so it's like this final act of selfishness. It's something I'm still wondering about, like what Unamuno meant with that ending. My only criticism of the book is the monotony of its self-pitying protagonist. It's kind of one note after a while. It's interesting, there are a lot of fascinating questions opened up, and it's certainly worth reading, but sometimes you're just like, okay, all right. You start to feel like one of his like one of his friends or something. Like he's just like constantly complaining, like how the world is just like beating him down, and he's taking everything personally. It's all about him, right? He's a complete narcissist. You spend a lot of time listening to this guy whine, but his whining is philosophically interesting. Miguel de Unamuno liked to experiment and blend forms of literature. This is philosophical metafiction played out as a domestic drama. The characters actually reference Cain and Abel in the novel. Abel even decides to make a painting of them. Heavy-handed, maybe, but clever for the period. This is about envy. Deep, unshakable, inexplicable, wrenching, hateful envy. Where does it come from? Why does it exist? We don't know. And neither does Joaquin. And he doesn't figure it out. Just like Unamuno was saying, he won't figure it out as long as he lives. That's the conflict. When you're seething with hateful envy, you turn inward. You become myopic. Everything is a snub. Everything is an insult. What's fascinating is Joaquin's realization in his confessions of the hell he inhabits, even though he doesn't believe in hell. I assume because he's a man of science. But, it's like what Jordan Peterson was saying about hell. And he speaks a lot about Cain and Abel. So if you're a Jordan Peterson fan, Jordan B. Peterson, I would definitely suggest you check this out. But that same idea plays out here. And there's this passage in his confessions, like in the diary that Joaquin has written. He says, "The scene between Cain and Lucifer in the abyss of space remained engraved in my soul, as if it had been burned in. I saw my science in the light of my sin and the wretchedness of giving life in order to propagate death. And I saw clearly that this immortal hatred constituted my soul. This hatred, I thought, must have preceded my birth and would survive after my death. I was shaken with horror to think of living always so as to abhor always. This was hell, and I had so scoffed at belief in it. It was a literal hell. Better than food. So who should read it? Fans of Dostoevsky, Cervantes, Gothic religious allegorical stories. Again, Peterson's been talking a lot about Cain and Abel. If you watch those talks and you found that interesting, check this out. John Steinbeck's East of Eden was also inspired by the story of Cain and Abel. I reviewed that way back in the early days and then deleted it because it was terrible. So maybe I should re-review that novel because it's a good one and it deserved a much better review. So if you were a fan of that, of East of Eden, I suggest you check this out. This came way before and is equally good. Yeah, that would have been interesting if Steinbeck actually got his hands on this one. But Who knows? Time for the coffee lottery. I've had too much caffeine today, so I'm going to skip out on a cup. But coffee lottery, for those of you who are new, is where I take all the names of the patrons on Patreon who have donated $5 or more to the show. I place them in this mason jar, and I pull out a name for every review, and I send the person whose name I've drawn a hard copy of the book, plus a bag of coffee, roasted by yours truly. And it's delicious coffee. If you would like to get in on that, you can head to the description box below and click the link. Thank you very much to the patrons who have supported the show already. I sincerely appreciate it, and best of luck to all of you. All right, here we go. Abel Sanchez. Hey, Daniel. Thanks, Daniel. You shall be receiving Abel Sanchez and some delicious coffee. Speaking of this coffee, come in these big bags. This is the green coffee I ordered from Sweet Maria's out of Oakland. They're fantastic. We've got the Ethiopia Yirgacheffe Torre. Stone fruits, nectarines, cinnamon and sugar, dried apricot, peach, dried papaya, herbal rue notes. Impressive middle roasts, good for espresso. Please subscribe if you have not already. Hope you enjoyed this. Hope you're getting a lot out of the show. Please suggest any books that you've found better than food in the comments below. And hope you're doing well. Thank you again to all the patrons, all the new patrons, everybody. Thank you, thank you, and thank you. Thank you so much. You can also find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. All that jazz. Really appreciate it. Okay, always remember, die reading. Take care of yourselves. Have a good night. I'll talk to you soon. Ciao.